for the record, just with respect to this article, if you would just indulge me.
Go ahead.
It really just says, please share with the Warrant Committee that while I truly respect the opinion of the Town Government Study Committee and the role they play as an advisory committee to the board, I believe it is necessary to allow the voters of our town to decide whether or not to increase to 5 members. The voters elect us and trust us as a consensus-building board to serve our town in its best interest, and thus they ultimately deserve a say in any change in the way that our town is led. I fully support a referendum.
Thank you. So that was a statement. So we have 2 guests here that might like to speak. They're pointing at each other, so you first. But whichever way that is resolved, we'd be happy to have you step up to the table and talk to us. Okay. I'd like to welcome Peter Mullen of the Town Government Study Committee and a long-term town meeting member to the table. Take it away, Peter. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, there's been, I think, a consensus that this expansion from a 3-member board to a 5-member board. Certainly when the selectmen appeared before the Town Government Study Committee, that was the view of all 3 of the selectmen. You know, this was first recommended in the Department of Revenue review of town operations. There's unanimous agreement on the Town Government Study Committee that we should be going ahead with this change. And at least in our prior meetings with the Warrant Committee, we've had the sense that there was complete support within the Warrant Committee for the expansion. I think the big question, the big issue is, should there be a referendum, and should this matter go to the voters as part of that process? The Town Government Study Committee did discuss that. We voted not to include a referendum. You know, there's been some discussion here tonight about, isn't this a fundamental change, and shouldn't we go back to the people with regard to it? I think the article that we passed at the last town meeting for a strong town administrator was a much more fundamental change in the structure of town government than this expansion of the board. At the last town meeting, we voted that no longer would an elected board appoint the police chief, the fire chief, the DPW director, any of the department heads. We said that the town administrator is going to have that authority. I mean, that was a very fundamental change in the structure of the government. We said that no longer is the chief executive authority of the town going to be this 3-member board, that we're going to make the town administrator the person who runs the town on a day-to-day basis, and that the Board of Selectmen is going to be a policy-making body. I think that was a very fundamental change. And at the last town meeting, there was a motion on the floor to submit that vote to the voters. And there was a standing vote, and it was rejected 2-1. I think it was like 158 to 57 or something like that. I think it's important for the Warrant Committee to decide, and I would urge you to go with the version of the recommendation that does not require a referendum. There is a cost to having a referendum, and that cost is delay. If we have a referendum, we will not have an expanded Board of Selectmen prior to May 2018, as far as I can see. We have a town meeting scheduled for October 26th. The ballot for the 2016 town election will close on April 22nd. So you have essentially 5 months after town meeting to get the matter written up, get it into the legislature, get it before a committee, get it through two houses of the legislature, and then have the governor sign it. That would have to be done in 5 months. I've been talking with Kevin tonight, you know, he says it is doable. You know, it's possible, I mean, 5 months is enough time to do those things, but the reality is that things almost never happen that way. With regard to the town administrator article, that was adopted on May 7th at town meeting. It did not go to the legislature until July 29th, because it has to get written up by the town clerk and town council, and there's lots of things to do after town meetings. You know, the hearing on the bill in the legislature is going to be tomorrow. You know, it hasn't been enacted by any chamber, either body. So that I just don't think it's realistic to think that we're going to get anything on the ballot in 2016. If we don't, then the next opportunity to do that is going to be the annual town election in 2017. And if you have the referendum in 2017, then the actual expansion of the board won't be till the following year, 2018. You know, there's been talk about, well, couldn't we just use the state election, the presidential election in November of 2016? As the article is, as the recommendations are written right now, they call for this referendum vote to happen at either a town annual election or at the special election, a special election called for that purpose. So that if we were going to do a special election, I guess the selectmen could call one and we could do that, but that's at some considerable expense to the town. You know, there's a certain magic to the idea that, well, we gave the voters a chance to pass one way or the other. I talked this afternoon with the town clerk, Susan Galvin, and she pulled together some numbers for me with regard to town elections. You know, at the last town election, we had a race for Board of Selectmen. You would think that that would bring people out. We had 26% turnout of the registered voters in the town. Over the last 10 years, she looked at all 10 years, we've had an average of 30% turnout in town elections. We had one election where there was an 8% turnout and another election where there was a 13% turnout. When you have referendum questions on the ballot, we've had 45 and 47% turnouts. So that, you know, we have a representative town meeting. I don't have any sense that town meeting won't reflect the will of the voters of the town. I think that there's a cost involved in delaying the implementation of this. The idea of going to a 5-member board is that this board is going to have a different role, a different view. It's not going to be involved in day-to-day operation of the town. It's going to be trying to look down the road and plan on the things that aren't getting done and the things we should be thinking about. You know, it's not going to be a constituent called me and said, how come my trash wasn't picked up, or there's potholes in the street, or whatever. It's going to be, what's the proper staffing for the office of the town administrator? Should we have another assistant to town administrator? Do we need a chief financial officer? Do we have a 5-year financial plan? I mean, the board is going to be looking at very different questions than it's been looking at in the past. Right now, if we have to wait until April 2018 to vote on expanding the Board of Selectmen, there's a darn good chance that we're going to have to pick a new town administrator in that interim period between now and that date. If Anne Marie were to resign, then, or retire, we'd have to go through a process of hiring a new town administrator. I think whether we have a three-member board or a five-member board could influence the pool of applicants to fill that position. I think that people who are professional town administrators and might be interested in applying to be town administrator of this town would have some second thoughts if we've got a three-member board. We've been talking about going to a five-member board since 2013, and we haven't done it. I think you want to know what you're getting into, and I think we want to go ahead, get this done, and then, you know, those are my arguments. That's my thought.
And I'm going to get to you, Darnell, in just a second. And that's essentially the position of the Town Government Study Committee.
Yes, not the unanimous view, but...
Not the unanimous, but the majority view.
Could I just add one other thing? With regard to the various recommendations, you mentioned that you got two new recommendations today from John Flynn. We would urge you to use the John Flynn recommendations. That enactment language, I think, is good. John has much more experience in drafting home rule petitions, and therefore we would defer to John with regard to that.
Great. That clears that point up.
And he sent you two versions, one with a referendum and one without.
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct. Darnell.
You said you say there's a cost to spending an extra, if it takes an extra 6 months or an extra year, to changing over from the three-member board to the five-member board. Can you articulate some of those costs and where we're going to be deficient financially in that? Because in my view, I don't see the need to take the ability for the town to vote on a change in town government and away from the people in the town, because there is some cost that hasn't been explained or, you know, even just talked about. What is the actual cost? Now, we're taking, and what you might think, because what we're doing is right now with the strong town administrator, we're trying to develop and solidify that position as one. Two, we're taking responsibilities away from the selectmen, all right, and bringing it down to the level of the town administrator, and which frees up more time with the for the selectmen to do some of this financial planning, putting some things into place. And three, even though we did make some of those changes that you spoke about as far as moving the, bringing on the fire department, you know, fire chief, police chief, all under the town administrator, that town administrator is still under an elected board. Okay, so even though those changes, even though some of those changes were made, we still have an elected board that oversees the functions and operations of that town administrator. So yes, we pull things off of the plate of the town board of selectmen, but we did not preclude them from being involved in the processes that led to those hirings and things of that nature with that vote at town meeting. So I still say we're talking about an appointed position over elected positions. We're talking about a change in the fundamental way in which the town is being governed through elected officials. And I don't see, you stated costs, that I haven't heard anybody articulate the individual costs of waiting to implement the other two selectmen over.
I think the costs are essentially opportunity costs. You know, that to the extent that you still have this three-member board and they're still playing the traditional role that they've always played, then you're not doing the other things that the board can be doing. We don't have a chief procurement officer. That's something that somebody needs to focus on and figure out, how are we purchasing things, and are there ways to save money with regard to purchasing things? A five-member board could focus on that. We don't have a 5-year financial plan. We don't have, I mean, the Warrant Committee, to some extent, has to put, each year puts together the financial plan. You know, the costs, I think, are opportunity costs. We're running a $100 million a year operation with a 3-member board, where those 3 members cannot talk with each other about anything relating to town government outside of a formally posted meeting. And if we go for a referendum, we won't be able to change that until May of 2018. 2 selectmen won't be able to talk to each other about town government until then.
Hey, Darnell, you have a follow-up, and then Mike?
And again, we're talking about opportunity costs. That's what you use
Yeah.
as your reference for what would be the difference. Again, that's hard to quantify, if you would agree with me. It's hard to quantify. And again, we haven't addressed that by taking some of those responsibilities out of our current Board of Selectmen, which they're already doing. We open up the opportunity for them to do some of these things that you're talking about. We have a procurement process that we go through. It's for capital products and stuff in town. We have a capital committee who heads that up, and we do have a board member of the Board of Selectmen who sits on that committee. Now, do I think there's other opportunities out there and other things that we can be getting our board involved in, that forward thinking, forward planning and stuff? Yes. But again, it does not bridge the gap or the complaint of we got to do this now, basically cutting off a vote of the town. All right? To me, that's sacrosanct. When you start to do this type, when you start to talk about this type of change in the way the town is governed and run, I think it's sacrosanct that we allow the town to make some of these decisions. And if we don't want to have them make those decisions, I think we should basically really put forth the argument of why and what benefits their town is actually going to get, not like it's an opportunity cost loss, or opportunities that we're going to gain. I think we should articulate either via projects, either getting more work, what work needs to get done, gets done, something to say, you know, it's that important that we forego a vote of the town.
Well,
I mean, that what I'm hearing is not enough, I guess what I'm saying.
Town council sent the chairman an email this afternoon saying that a vote of the town is not required by any state statute. It's not required by any legal requirement.
I understand that.
We've made other changes without doing any kind of a vote. A couple of years ago, we changed the term of the town moderator. The moderator used to be elected each year and close to the people. We made a change and went to a 3-year term for moderator. We didn't submit that to a referendum of the voters. We, at the last town meeting, the town meeting overwhelmingly rejected the idea of putting the changes in the position of town administrator out to a vote of the people. So that it's not a one-way process. There hasn't always been a vote of the voters of the town. There have been some times, there haven't been other times. You know, I think the cost of the delay is significant here.
I haven't, Ted, just respond one more time to this. And
Okay, let's not
I'm not trying to
plow the same
No,
ground
okay.
too.
I know, I'm just saying, I was just
Many
wondering,
times.
because you made a point.
Okay.
You know, again, there's a lot of things that we're not required to do, and things, and we can just get away with just going ahead and doing these things. But there's also, when you're changing the number of fathers you have running your town, and that's what we talk about when we talk about our Board of Selectmen, when you make that change, the people of the town should have the right to weigh in on that vote. Okay, if you want to extend the, you know, you say we did the moderator, we're extending that term. Yeah, that's the moderator. People still get to vote whether we keep him or not. When you start to add members onto that Board of Selectmen, and again, the townspeople should have the right to vote if they want to change the number, and I'll use this old style term, fathers of the town. Sorry, Katie, but it's the old style turn the house in. Okay. Yeah, and that should be decided by the town itself, not just folks who we can get to show up at town meeting and the things to that nature. And to say, oh, we only had X amount of people come out, you allow your dissenters to vote because then they're still part of the town. I think that's important. If you believe this is going to pass, I believe it's going to pass, but you allow the dissenters to vote, and then they have always had their opportunity to speak on this issue. If you send it to town meeting, a lot of people, I believe, will feel left out, and they will, make their feelings known other ways, and I don't think that's be helpful.
Okay, now I've got Mike and Phil and Lee Michael looking to ask you questions.
Okay.
Thank you, Pete. Okay.
Yeah, well, first of all, I got to say, I really respect the Board of Selectmen that have come here, and, I agree with what they say. And then I remember I've been in town meeting for many years, and when I hear Peter Mullen from Precinct 3 get up and say something, I often am swayed
Precinct
too.
2 now.
Another change that
See-
was made without a
We
vote.
didn't have that.
That was,
Well, that shows you how long ago I was on town meeting. I remember it used to be 3. But I guess my question for you would be is, are you okay with this delay that the selectmen are asking for to April of 2017? Is that enough of a...
Yes, the committee voted that, and realistically, I think we couldn't really do an election before 17. So, yes, I have no problem with that.
And a second question is there any way we can get this on the state ballot for November 2016? If we went to have a referendum,
Well, right
which you don't
now,
want to have.
right now, the recommendation that you have says that it will be, that any referendum would be the next annual or special town election, so that the selectmen would have to call a special town election for the purposes of having this referendum. Now, maybe they could call it on the same day as the national election for president, but I would think that that complicates things for the town clerk, and that, people are either going to have to get 2 ballots, or they're going to have, the presidential election ballot has to get approved by the Secretary of State, I believe, and I don't know that you can put town questions on there. I don't know, I don't know the details relating to that.
Okay, so I asked you a question you couldn't answer, sorry. But this is the, now I'll just,
So-
my observation.
I just want to interject a comment here. It's our recommendation. We can change the terms of the recommendation.
We can put commas wherever we
We
want.
could, thank you. Punctuation, I know, is my strong suit. At any rate, we could change it to the next possible election, if we
Okay, so-
wanted to.
Well, one of the things I've learned from getting involved in the town is that there's a lack of involvement by the regular citizens in town government. There's a feeling that there are not enough people running for town meeting, and there's not enough people, sustaining the form of government that we have. And so, my observation is, I think you're right, that the turnout is pretty low in town elections. But I can remember the 2008 presidential election, where there was a very long line to get in and vote. And that this could potentially, as long as you're okay with getting it done by April 2017, if we could get it on the ballot in November 2016, we'd have more people exposed to this question, and maybe it would be a teaching moment.
Do
you
you
think
think
that
the
is
people that are
possible?
going to be showing up to vote in the presidential election are going to take the time to get up to speed on the issue of should we have 3 or 5 member board of selectmen?
I hope so.
Well, I'm skeptical of that. I think the people that have run for town meeting, and I think that they're much more likely to be up to speed and be able to reflect the views of the town.
Okay, well, thanks for your answers.
Phil?
All I wanted to say was that I'm looking forward to the opportunity to discuss the viewpoint that Darnell has expressed on numerous occasions once we get to a deliberation of this committee. but I'd like to hear from whatever remaining witnesses want to testify. It's 10 after 9. We've got other articles that we need
Business
to
pending,
address, and
yes.
I'm concerned about
I
time.
think Lee Michael had the last question for Peter.
I'll defer.
You'll defer. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming. I appreciate the input. Kevin?
Good evening.
This is
And
Kevin Mern, for those of you who don't know him. He
Let me
was-
just, maybe as a brief introduction,
Go
because I
ahead.
know some people pointed at me to answer a couple of questions early on, a while ago tonight. My name's Kevin Mern. I'm a town meeting member, Precinct 6. I had the privilege and certainly my honor to serve as a town worker for 39 years. My last 2 assignments, the one before my last one, I was the police chief for 15 years. And my assignment after that, I was the town administrator for 5 years. And I thought I'd still be the town administrator, but 2 other individuals thought otherwise. And I didn't, I had strong reservations for their motives, but I certainly respect the fact that they can make that call. But that's not why I'm here. And I'm not here to talk about whether there should be 3 or 5 selectmen. What I'm here to talk about is on April 25th, 2013, there was a report issued. And one of the recommendations, I believe it's on page 6, it's the first recommendation, as a matter of fact, of that committee, states, and I hope I've quoted it correctly, but we can look it up later, reinforcing the need for town meeting members to be accountable to their constituents. Now, that report was by the Town Government Study Committee. And I'd like to talk tonight about process. Changing from 3 selectmen, and again, this has nothing to do with the Town Government Study Committee or its members. You have the utmost respect for Mr. Mullen, utmost respect for a board that I've been in front of for 20 years, the Warrant Committee. So it's not about that. It's about process. This is about allowing the residents of this town, and whether or not they come out to vote and what the percentage is not relevant. And I'm going to explain something in this last hour and a half is exactly what I mean. This hasn't been vetted. It hasn't been vetted. And I'm going to give you the perfect example, the discussion tonight. We had a town meeting. We voted, and I voted, on an article regarding the town administrator. And we've spent, I don't know how, 2 hours talking about the article. And whether there should be 3 or 5 somehow got into that. That's not the article here tonight. And in fact, when we voted on that article, and I was there, and I listened to the discussion, not one person got up and said, oh, by the way, maybe we should hold off on this town administrator stuff until we decide whether we 3 or 5 selectmen. We didn't have that discussion. It wasn't vetted. The town meeting didn't even vet this thing out because we're still talking about the town administrator. We voted it. I don't know why we keep talking about it. That job is strictly an appointment by the Board of Selectmen. It is the exact same as the school superintendent appointing, being appointed by the school committee. It's the exact same. What the duties are is not relevant. It is the sole responsibility of our elected officials to make that decision. Whether there's 3 or whether there's 5 is not relevant. It's who's sitting in the office is entitled to make that decision. So I don't know why we keep talking about that in this context here. This article needs to go to the voters. This article is going to go to the voters. And, people say, well, town meeting, when they, we're representative of town meeting. Exactly. We represent the people. Just as this town government study committee said back 2 years ago, that town meeting members have to look after their constituents. Well, I've talked to my constituents. And my constituents, some of them didn't even know that this was an issue. They weren't even aware of it. So it hasn't been properly vetted. It seems to be that we're rushing this thing in. We've had 3 selectmen for hundreds of years. I don't know how long, but a long, long time. Certainly for the 39 years I've been working for this town. And there doesn't seem to be any problem, and I don't ever recall I don't ever recall, and I've been to 25 years of town meetings, any discussion about, well, we don't have enough town meeting, Board of Selectmen members, we need 5. This all came up in, from the DOR report. It wasn't even included in the initial report by the Town Government Study Committee. Nowhere. They made 6, 7 recommendations. This isn't one of them. So it hasn't been properly vetted. And all I care about is that the residents in this town, who I represent, have an opportunity to vote it up or down. And you know something? It would have answered, we should have put, after listening to tonight's discussion, we should put the town administrator's position on a ballot so we can put that to bed. Because I cannot believe we're talking about that in the context of whether we should have 3 or 5 selectmen. And I want to be very respectful of the residents in this town, because I get a sense sometimes people kind of just, and pardon my French, just blow them off, as if, well, they don't know, they don't understand. I take great offense to that. I really do. This is a great town. This is a town I grew up in. And this is a town where the voters are going to have a say on this. And I think you've already answered your own question here tonight when the handout by the Board of Selectmen, and I'm not representing the Board of Selectmen on this issue. Let me be clear on that. When I first found out about it, I called the town moderator. And I says, hey, Brian, I just want to make sure this is going to voters. And he says, well, that doesn't appear to be. And I says, well, Brian, I'm a town meeting member, and I represent them. And I'm going to get up at the town meeting floor and have the same discussion. And I'm not, again, I don't care about the 3 or 5 right now, because I think we haven't even vetted that out. But what I want to be clear about is this is going to go to the voters. And I think by the fact that in the 1980s, or whenever that decision was made, that it went from town meeting to the general court to the voters just to decide whether they were going to do a 1-year term or a 3-year term. I think the general court's going to say, well, if the town cared that much about that one issue, about how many years they're going to work or be appointed to, they certainly should be entitled to decide whether there should be 3 or there should be 5. And with all due respect to Mr.
Kevin, on that particular point, we do have town council's opinion that this article would not require the town vote, so that the general court would probably not say anything about it.
I think if you go back and ask town council, can the general court mandate that this go on the ballot? I think the answer is going to be yes. Because the general court can, it's a home rule petition. General court can make adjustments to home rule petitions.
That's
And
true.
they've done that. So, yeah, I think you just got to ask the question the right way. I don't think he was asked that question, but, I'm not a legal expert, so, but I am a student of town government. I mean, if we're really concerned, let's be honest, if we're really concerned about the most efficient and effective town government, anybody who's a student of local government would know that a mayoral form of government is the most efficient and most effective when you have a qualified mayor. So we're not talking about, efficiency. And, what we're talking about is what the
I guess
people in this town
efficiency
want.
and town government is mutually exclusive in some
Not
cases. Is that
necessarily.
what you're...
And I don't like to, be forceful about this, but I feel so passionate about it. I really do. And one thing I intend to do is go to town meeting. I'm going to argue, that go to the voters. I am not in favor of it. I'll tell you that right now. But even if town meeting, by a wild chance, should decide to vote down this article, I would advocate, because it's out there now, that we get it on a ballot and let the residents decide once and for all. We want 3, we want 5. Because if we go to town meeting and we just go with town meeting, we might end up with the same discussion we're having with, town administrator. Well, maybe we should have, 6, selectmen. Maybe we should go back to 3. We could have an article, every year on this. Let's just put it to bed. I can't believe we didn't put the town meeting, we just had the town meeting, and we're still talking about the town administrator.
Well,
Fathom that.
we're talking about the town administrator
In the
because of
context
the
of,
context
of
the
3 to 5
3 to 5
selectmen, and there was no discussion, not one discussion about the fact that we might have 5 selectmen, maybe we should hold off on this and do that. But you know, rather than just, I think it's always been the Warrants Committee, you know, if you're up at town meeting and you're gonna take money from one pool to give it to another, you have to explain where the money's coming. So I'm gonna give you the solution. Very simple. Change the wording. And I wouldn't put it necessarily, put it the next election, it's fine. Because I have all the faith in the world that our legislative delegation can get this done in time for the April town election, that this will be on the ballot. And even if it isn't, you know, circumstances are, if DOR hadn't filed their report until today, you folks wouldn't be talking about it at all. So time is not an issue here. We've had 3 selectmen forever. Time is not, what is relevant is including the residents of this town to determine the executive branch of this town. And town meeting does not, you know, appoint selectmen. And they don't appoint school committee members. The residents do. And the residents I talk to, when I sit down and explain this to them, they get concerned. They get very concerned. And I guarantee you, you know, and God is my judge, I guarantee you, I could get enough signatures to have a referendum question put on the ballot. But that is not the way I think it should be done. I think it should be done in the correct manner, in you know, everybody on the same page, and just move forward. And this is not being disrespectful to anybody. This is just the way it should be done. And it's the common way to be, it's the right way. And I even bet, Peter, I bet him $5, and he could hold the $5. That I could have this done, that I could have this done before, with our delegation, this thing could be on the April ballot. So, I think there was one other point that someone had said that, no, I don't want to take a lot of time, it's late. So, you know, I appreciate you listening to me, I appreciate the fact that you let me come in, you know, I appreciate the effort you folks have all done, and, you know, I appreciate the discussion at town meeting, but I am passionate, and I cannot say it in any other word, that the voters have this opportunity. And I intend as a town meeting member to take whatever avenues I need to take to make sure that happens, because that's what they elected me for.
Well, obviously, the avenue that any town meeting member could take is to, if we don't pass an amendment that puts it to a referendum, they could suggest that. They could make that motion. So that is obviously why we're talking about it now, so that we may not have to talk about it again. But anyway, thank you for coming in, Kevin,
Thank you.
and giving us your opinion on it. Appreciate that. Okay. Tom.
And I'll be brief, because I know you do want to get on. But there were a couple of things that Mr. Mullins said that I just want to rebut a bit when he was talking about his opportunity costs, and happened to mention 2 things that the board has actively, as a 3-member board, we've actively done. And number 1 is a 5-year projection. We have a 5-year projection.
Okay.
We're going to do the next 5-year projection.
Tom.
So
I'll believe the 5-year projection when the Warrant Committee has a presentation of it. I mean, I know it's out there,
well, you
but
know,
we never
you
got
also
it.
know
So-
what the problem was with it, and it wasn't the Board of Selectmen. The Board of Selectmen fully supported it. The Board of
Right.
Selectmen got it through. The Board of Selectmen did a 5-year projection. The Board of Selectmen is putting forward a roll forward of that 5-year projection.
Well, the
Number
school,
2.
I understand
Number
that,
two.
Tom. Tom,
Number
I
two.
understand that, and I understand the school committee got to see the 5-year projection. I don't know why we didn't.
Because
get
they
to see
squashed it.
They squashed it.
They wouldn't let it go forward.
And did they squash the 5-year plan for the previous 3 years?
What do you mean for the previous 3 years?
Do you have 5-year plans for the last 3 to 5 years?
We
Notice.
instituted it last year. We finally got to the point where we wanted to get it moving, and we did it. And it wasn't at the behest of anybody else other than the Board of Selectmen. Had it not been for us, it wouldn't have gone anyplace. Number two, the Board of Selectmen put together a committee, which we call the Town School Consolidation Committee. That committee was responsible, and I'm fully supporting of the software that we're putting in. Number two was we are having many discussions, and it will happen shortly, that we will have a procurement officer. We will have a procurement officer, but more importantly, and where I'm going as the board, is it's the procurement process, not the officer, the process to consolidate. So to say that 3 members cannot be good policymakers and there's opportunity cost is absolutely false.
Well, thank you for that.
Can I just
Katie,
make
please.
a very brief point, just that regarding Peter's comment about the fact that the town administrator change is a very significant one, and it is. But just keep in mind that the town administrator article in the legislation that's pending before the general court does have a 15-day veto period over department head appointments. So when we say that, well, a big piece of the board's authority and power is being transferred to the town administrator, that's true, but there are safeguards in that the board, we hope it'll be used very sparingly and rarely, but the board still would have a say in whether the appointment of a particular individual department head would go forward or not. There also, when we worked on the town administrator article, we also talked very much about the fact that, and we heard from other communities, that just because the town administrator is going to have the decision-making authority, the town administrator still has to report to the Board of Selectmen. In most cases, if the town administrator is smart and is concerned about their future with the town, is going to be in regular communication with the board and be listening to some comments that the board is going to have on department head hiring. So while it is a significant change, the board is not being completely removed from the picture, even with a town manager or a very strong town administrator. At the end of the day, the buck is still going to stop with the board, and if there's a problem, the board is going to be the one to hear about it, the one that addresses it, and maybe that means through replacing the town administrator, but that's, the town administrator's duties are operational and are administrative. It's not policy making, which is what is going to remain with the board, whether it's 3 or 5. We just think that's an important point to bring out. Thank you. Thank you all for your consideration.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay. Wow. Well, so this was not so much a debate about, well, it wasn't supposed to be a debate about 3 or 5, and I see that it seems to have gone back to a debate, about the merits of 3 versus 5. The current board we have of 3, I think, does yeoman service for the town, and we all have frustrations, and maybe the school committee is one of them in terms of the 5-year plan. Didn't realize that ended the 5-year plan. I thought it just delayed it.
It hasn't ended the 5-year plan. We're still going forward with a 5-year plan.
Okay. Well, in that case, the Warrant Committee would be happy to see it someday.
Certainly.
Thank you. So it's gone an hour past the time that I invited the planning board in for. I'm glad we had this opportunity to consider this, and we will get back to it, but we're going to take a brief break and then under 3 minutes, and then invite Emily Innes of the planning board to come tell us about a couple of articles we need to consider tonight. So, thank you all for coming. Those who might leave, you don't have to leave. You're welcome to stay. So thanks for coming in and talking to us. And we'll take a, I don't know that we need a movement for recess, but we're taking a break now. Tom, thank you very much.